Have you ever tried to chase the wind? To touch something you can't see, but feel deep in your bones? When I was a child, I believed I could catch it, and one day, I ran. What I discovered changed my life forever. The whisper in the air. When the wind first spoke to me, they say the wind has no shape, no home, no memory. But I remember the first time it spoke to me, not with words, but with something deeper, something older than sound. I was 7 years old. The sun was melting low over the hills behind my village, painting the grass gold. And I was lying on my back under the baobab tree, watching the sky, wondering what lay beyond it. That's when I heard it. Not a voice, not exactly dot. It was more like a sigh, the kind your mother makes when she's thinking too hard, or the sound a dream makes when it's about to slip away. A ripple passed through the tall grass. The branches above me rustled gently, even though the rest of the tree stood still. The air changed dot. It wasn't just breeze. It was invitation, and in that moment I knew, deep in the hollow part of my chest, where secrets live, that the wind had come for me. You must understand, I wasn't special. Not really. I was just a quiet boy who liked to run. I had more questions than answers, and more dreams than sleep. My mother used to say I had ants in my heart because I couldn't sit still for long. The other children laughed at how far I'd wander on my own, how I'd come home with my feet muddy and my eyes filled with sky. But I wasn't just playing. I was listening, because after that first day, the day under the baobab, the wind began to visit me more often. It would sneak into my window at night, lifting the curtain just enough to brush against my cheek like a whisper. It would dance ahead of me when I walked to the river, stirring the dust in little spirals as if urging me to follow. And when I closed my eyes, sometimes I could swear I heard it hum. Not just noise, a message. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? In our village, stories were sacred. You had to earn them. You had to wait until you were old enough to understand their weight. But this wasn't a story I'd heard before. This was something mine, something I couldn't explain, only feel. I began to chase it. Every morning before the roosters cried, I would slip out of our hut barefoot and run across the dewy grass. I wasn't running for distance or speed or escape. I was running toward something. The wind always stayed just ahead, tugging at the tips of my ears, brushing my shoulders, curling around my ankles like a playful dog dot. It was alive. I knew it. Sometimes I'd ask questions out loud. Strange ones. Where do you sleep? Are you lonely? Why me? And though the wind never answered in words, I could always tell when it understood. A sudden gust would lift my hair. A sharp swirl would spin dry leaves in a circle around me. Once, a feather floated down from nowhere and landed right in my palm. That day, I almost cried because I knew then this was real, but no one else did. When I told my older brother, he laughed until his stomach hurt. The wind? You're chasing the wind? He said, eyes wide with mockery. Why not chase the moon next, or the scent of firewood? My mother didn't laugh, but she frowned. She said I was spending too much time alone. She asked if I was sick. She told me stories of boys who wandered into spirits and never came back. But I wasn't afraid, not yet. I remember one evening, a storm was building in the west. The elders told everyone to stay indoors. Thunder rolled in the distance like angry drums. But I stood outside, arms wide, eyes closed, and waited dot, and the wind came to me fierce. Dot, it howled through the trees, pulled at my tunic, tangled itself in my curls. It wasn't playful that night. It was wild, urgent. I could feel something in it, a challenge, as if it were saying, if you're brave enough to chase me, then come. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, my fingers curled around the feather under my mat, my heart pounding with a question I hadn't dared say out loud before. What if the wind is leading me somewhere? And from that moment on, I made up my mind. I would chase it, truly, not just through the fields or down the river path, but beyond. Beyond the hills we were told never to climb. Beyond the trees that marked the edge of our village stories. Beyond the places maps forgot and birds whispered about in secret. Because I believed, no, I knew, the wind had something to show me. Something no one else could see. Something that waited only for me, And once a boy begins to believe in something invisible, something impossible, there's no stopping him. I was no longer just a boy who ran for fun. I was the boy who chased the wind, and my real story was only just beginning. The boy who wasn't like the others, a soul that couldn't sit still, they called me strange, not out of meanness, not always, but with that quiet kind of dismissal grown-ups use when they don't understand you, the way you'd speak about a cracked pot or a chicken that doesn't lay eggs. Not broken, exactly, but odd. His feet don't like staying still, the elders would mutter. His thoughts are too loud for his age. Even when I sat silently, they looked at me like I was somewhere else. And truthfully, I never really lived inside the village. Not with my thoughts, anyway. My body was there, hauling water, eating millet, helping my mother patch mats, but my mind was always somewhere beyond the hills, chasing shadows and wind voices that no one else seemed to hear. Other boys my age dreamed of spears and strong arms, of wrestling in the dirt, of one day becoming warriors. Their laughter came easily, their games were loud. They were proud of how fast they could climb trees or how many fish they caught. I envied them, but I also did ID and single quotes T. Because when I tried to join in, something in me felt borrowed, like I was pretending to wear shoes that didn't belong to me. I laughed, I played, I shouted, but it all floated just above the surface. And beneath it, the wind still called. I think the adults noticed before I did how different I was. My father rarely spoke of it, but I'd catch him watching me from the doorway when I walked alone in the fields, shaking his head softly as if trying to solve a riddle. My mother tried to bring me back down to earth with chores and stories of caution. She feared I'd wander too far, like the old tales of boys who followed river spirits into the sky and were never seen again. But my grandmother, she saw something else. She once told me, some children are born with sky in their bones. You're not meant to be rooted like others. You're meant to drift like the wind you chase. I held on to those words like a secret talisman. Still, being different meant being alone. And loneliness, especially when you're young, can feel like hunger, slow and aching. There were nights I'd sit outside our hut while the village lights dimmed, tracing the stars with my finger and wishing I could fit into the world the way others seemed to. But then the wind would come, just a soft brush of it, barely enough to lift the grass, and I'd feel seen. Not by people, not by family, but by something ancient and knowing. It understood me in a way no one else could. I remember one day, during the dry season, the village held the harvest festival. There was dancing and drumming and painted faces, laughter bursting into the sky. I truly tried, to join. I let them pull me into the circle, my feet thudding on the dry earth, my body moving as the drumbeat commanded. But in the middle of it all, sweat on my brow, dust on my skin, I froze because I felt it. A sudden gust, swift and deliberate, cutting through the crowd like a whisper only I could hear. I turned my head sharply, and there it was. A trail of dust lifting along the edge of the tree line, spiraling, rising, curling into the air like a finger beckoning me forward. Without thinking, I stepped away from the dance. No one noticed at first. The drummers played on. The fire cracked, but I was already walking, barefoot, past the laughter, past the colors, past the safety of belonging. I followed the wind. It led me to the edge of the hill, where tall dry grass swayed like dancers of their own. I stood there for what felt like hours, the festival a distant hum behind me, the wind circling me like an embrace. I felt peace, purpose, but when I returned, the silence was loud. My mother scolded me in front of the other women. My brother called me the ghost boy, and the name stuck for weeks. Even the chief's son muttered, "He's always chasing nothing." They didn't understand. How could they? The wind had never called to them. They had never felt the invisible current pulling at their heart like a tide, but I had, and once you've felt that, you can't unfeel it. You can't go back to pretending you're like everyone else. I began to change in small ways. I woke earlier. I ran farther. I stopped trying to explain myself. When people asked, "Where are you going?" I'd just smile and say, "Out." When they warned me about spirits and snakes and things that wait beyond the village, I'd nod respectfully but keep walking. There was a restlessness growing inside me, like a song with no end, a hunger with no name. I would sit by the river and wonder if the wind began there, rising off the water's surface like breath. I would climb trees just to feel the higher breeze. I began sketching shapes in the dirt, spirals, loops, symbols I didn't know but felt right. One night, I dreamed of the wind as a woman, tall, faceless, wrapped in flowing cloth. She stood at the edge of a cliff and whispered, "Come." "When?" I told my grandmother. She didn't look surprised. She said, "The wind doesn't speak to the loud. It finds the ones who listen in silence." I began to wonder, maybe being different wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a kind of calling, a path only I could follow, and maybe, just maybe, I wasn't chasing the wind at all. Maybe it had been chasing me. The journey begins running beyond the edge of the world. The day I left, the sky was the color of smoke, not because a storm was coming, and not because of fire, but because the wind had been restless all night, as though it too was preparing to go somewhere. It hissed through the cracks in our home, twisted through the trees, and whistled across the grass roofs like a song rising in urgency. I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop by dawn. I had already tied a calabash of water to my hip and tucked a handful of roasted groundnuts in a pouch. That was all I took. No goodbye, no explanation. Some journeys require silence, not out of secrecy, but because there are no words for what they mean. As I stepped beyond the final fence of our village, I could feel it. The line I was crossing. It wasn't just physical. It was the boundary between knowing and becoming. I had spent years thinking about this moment, dreaming it into shapes. But now it was real. My feet sank into wild soil, untamed and untouched by familiar footsteps. And the wind? It was waiting. It brushed my right ear gently, curling like a question mark. It didn't shout or demand. It simply moved forward as if to say, "If you are ready, follow me." So I did. I walked through grasslands where the blades reached my chest, where insects clicked in secret languages. I passed sleeping termite mounds, their red clay towers cracked by sun and time. I crossed streams so narrow they whispered, then flowed, where frogs leapt like dancers at my approach, and always the wind was ahead, never beside me. Never behind. It was a ribbon of movement, pulling clouds across the sky, bending trees in its path. Sometimes I'd lose it for hours, only to find it again in a sudden gust that stirred the dust in a spiral. A signpost without words. The world outside my village was nothing like I'd imagined. It was louder, wilder, but also more awake. There were birds I had never seen before, with feathers the color of ash and emerald. Trees that didn't grow up, but out their branches weaving together like arms. And the silence, it wasn't empty. It was full of breath, a kind of silence that listens back. The first night, I slept under a twisted fig tree, my back against its warm roots, my eyes wide open to the sky. Stars gathered above me like old storytellers, blinking patiently as I whispered questions. Into the wind, where are you leading me? Will I ever return? Am I alone? And though no voice answered, the leaves above me rustled, and I felt the soft pull of something unseen wrap itself around my legs, like the wind tucking. Meaned up by the third day, the landscape began to change. The grass grew shorter. The trees spaced farther apart. Rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The wind grew stronger too, less gentle now, more purposeful. It didn't play. It drove. It moved with intention, as though guiding me not just forward, but deeper. Came to a gorge, wide and cracked like the earth had once split in sorrow. There was no bridge, just the bones of a fallen tree, stripped bare, stretching across like a challenge. My heart pounded. Below. The rocks glistened with old water and danger. I hesitated, but then, just as my feet shifted back, the wind surged. Not a howl, not a warning. A push. It struck my back with sudden force, lifting the edge of my tunic, ruffling my hair. I stepped forward. 1 foot. 2. My knees shook as I crossed, the wood creaking beneath me, the drop whispering its threats. But I made it. And on the other side, the wind fell still, almost reverent. That's when I understood. This journey wasn't just about following. It was about becoming worthy of the path. Every step tested me, not with monsters or spirits, but with doubt, with the urge to turn back, with the echo of voices I'd left behind telling me I was chasing nothing, but the wind believed in me, even when I didn't. On the 5th day, I reached a flat plain of red dust, the horizon blurred in the heat. Nothing moved, not even insects. The sky pressed down like a lid. I walked in silence for hours. No trees, no shade, no signs of direction. I began to fear I'd lost it. The wind, my guide, my purpose, until I saw them. 3 stones, arranged in a perfect triangle, standing alone in the dust. As I approached, the wind returned, sharp and precise. Circling the stones like a guardian, I knelt. And for the first time, the wind spoke. Not in words, not exactly. But in sensation, in memory. Images rushed through me. A mountain with no top, a woman in white at its peak, and my own feet running, always running toward her. Toward truth. I understood. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was the real beginning. The triangle of stones pointed north, toward a distant ridge. Barely visible against the sky, I stood. I nodded. The wind kissed my cheek like a blessing, and I walked on. I was no longer the boy from the village. I was no longer just chasing the wind. I was now part of it. Every step took me closer, not to a destination on a map, but to a place, written in the bones of the earth, a place I was born to find. And though I was still alone, I never felt lonely, because the wind was with me. Not ahead, not behind. Now, beside me, the place where the wind sleeps. And what I found there, I don't remember how many days passed after the stones. The journey had stopped being about time. My feet moved because they had to. My eyes searched the horizon, not for markers or signs, but for feeling. Something deep in my chest had taken over. That same pull I felt the first day the wind whispered to me. Stronger now, constant. And then one evening, it all changed. The world fell silent. Not the hush of nightfall, not the lull of a still morning, but a silence so complete it made the hairs on my arms rise. The kind that presses against your skin, like air turned heavy. Even the wind, my old companion, was gone. Utter stillness. I stood at the edge of a wide valley, barren and strange. The ground was made of smooth gray stone, stretched like skin pulled taut across bone. No trees, no. Grass, no sound. just a sky growing darker and a silence that seemed to hum. I had arrived. I didn't know how I knew. I just did. This was the place where the wind slept. I stepped forward, and the sound of my own feet echoed, soft taps against ancient stone. With each step, I felt like I was walking into something older than memory, a place the world itself had forgotten, yet somehow remembered me. In the center of the valley stood a single thing, a tall, twisted tree, long dead, its branches bare, its bark silvered with age. It looked like it had been struck by lightning long ago, and yet it still stood, defiant, proud. I approached. The wind didn't return. Not yet, but as I placed my hand on the bark, I felt something awaken. A vibration, deep and low, hummed beneath the surface, like a heart beating beneath layers of earth. I closed my eyes and leaned my forehead against the trunk, and suddenly, I was elsewhere. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a vision. It was something in between. I stood on a mountain high above clouds. The air shimmered with gold. The wind rushed around me, not as a force, but as a voice. Hundreds of voices, soft, fierce, young, old, all speaking at once, telling stories, singing songs, weeping and laughing, and in the center of it all stood a figure cloaked in white, with no face and no feet, her form shifting like mist. She spoke, or rather, I felt her speak inside my own thoughts. You have come far, child of air. I nodded, unable to speak. Why do you chase the wind? I thought about it. I thought about my village, my loneliness, my questions. I thought about the feather, the tree, the voices. And I answered the only way I could, because I was born to. The figure seemed to shimmer brighter. Then know this, the wind is not a thing to catch. It cannot be held or caged. It is the breath between stories, the space between what is and what will be. She stepped closer. You are not chasing it. You are part of it. And with that, she raised her hand and pressed her palm against my chest. I gasped, because suddenly I remembered things I never knew I'd forgotten. A memory of being in my mother's womb, hearing her sing, a flash of my first step, my first question, my first wonder. I saw myself running through the fields, laughing, alone, but never really alone. The wind had always been with me. Not just around me, inside me. It had shaped my thoughts, guided my steps, whispered my truths, because the wind was more than air. It was story, spirit, self. The vision faded. I was back in the valley. The tree stood before me, unmoved. But the silence had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt full of meaning. Full of me. The wind returned slowly, softly. It wrapped around my waist, brushed my face, curled around my hands. It didn't push me anymore. It didn't guide. It simply danced. Because now we were equals. I knelt before the tree and wept, not from sorrow, but from knowing. I had chased something the world couldn't see. I had followed whispers into the wild. And now at last I had found truth. But it wasn't an answer. It was a mirror. I was no longer chasing the wind. I was the wind. Its story, its rhythm, its breath. And with that realization, I knew what I had to do. It was time to return. Not because the journey was over, but because the story was ready to be shared. As I walked back across the valley, the wind rose behind me like applause. It swirled and spun and played, not to lead, but to celebrate. I was not the same boy who had left the village. Was something new. Something in between shadow and sun. A child of silence and song. A boy who had become what he chased. The return. Why I had to come back, and what I brought with me returned the way I came. Or so it seemed, but nothing looked the same. The trees I had passed before felt smaller now. The skies felt wider. Even the path under my feet, once, Hard and uncertain, felt soft, like it welcomed me home not with question, but with quiet recognition, because I was not the same. The boy who left chasing whispers had returned carrying a voice, not loud, not boastful, but steady, like the wind in early morning, brushing the earth awake. I took my time. I didn't rush. I no longer felt the need to outrun silence or prove I belonged. I understood now that stillness could be sacred, that the world does not need to move fast to change, and neither do we. When I reached the edge of my village, the sun was just rising. The fields were bathed in soft amber light. A rooster crowed in the distance. Children were beginning to stir, their voices gentle and high like flutes, just learning to play. No one noticed me at first. And I didn't mind. Stood there for a long while, watching life continue, watching how the wind moved through the crops, tugged at the corners of huts, lifted the ash from cooking fires like it was dancing between dawn and day. The wind had always been here. I just hadn't known how to see it. Finally, I stepped forward. Some of the villagers turned, surprised to see me, dusty, taller somehow, quieter. My brother ran to me first, not with words, but with arms wide open. His embrace felt real this time, not playful or mocking. My mother wept when she saw me. She pressed her hands against my cheeks and said, "You're thinner." I nodded. She added, "But your eyes, they're not the same." I told them I had been with the wind. They laughed at first, gently, lovingly, like people do when they think a child is still dreaming. But I didn't try to convince them, because this time I didn't need to. Instead, I showed them what I had brought back, not in my hands, but in my way of being. I listened more. I spoke less. But when I did speak, people leaned in, because the wind had taught me that words are like seeds. You only need a few, planted in the right place, to grow something powerful. Soon, the children began to follow me, not because I told them stories, but because I asked them questions. Have you ever wondered why the clouds move without feet? Do you think a tree can dream? What would you chase if no one told you to stop? They listened, they imagined. They began to run through the fields just as I once had, not away from anything, but toward wonder. The elders, too, began to notice. They asked me to sit in council, not because I was old or strong, but because I had seen something they could feel, even if they couldn't name it. I told them the story of the valley where the wind sleeps, of the silver tree, of the woman cloaked in sky and voice. I told them how I learned that the wind isn't a thing to be caught, but a truth to be carried. They listened in silence, and when I finished, the chief said only this: "Then carry it, child. Carry it well." And I did, not as a burden, but as a rhythm, a pulse. A way of walking through the world with both feet on the ground and heart forever chasing stars. Over time, they stopped calling me strange. They began to call me Wind Walker. Some even called me one who listens. I liked those names. But none of them mattered as much as the feeling I carried inside me, that I had found my place, not in staying, but in returning changed. Because chasing the wind wasn't about running away. It was about discovering who I really was when everything else was stripped away. The rules, the roles, the expectations. I was the boy who believed. The boy who followed what others could not see. The boy who returned not empty-handed, but full of wonder, of questions, of a story bigger than himself. And now I pass it to you. Yes. You, the one listening now. Maybe you felt it too. That tug in your chest when the wind shifts. That whisper just outside your hearing. That ache to go beyond what everyone else accepts as enough. Maybe you've been waiting for permission. This is it. Run. Chase what calls to you, even if no one else hears it. Even if the path is wild and uncertain. Even if you don't know what you're chasing yet, because maybe, just maybe, What you're chasing is yourself, Dot, and somewhere out there, beyond the noise, beyond the walls, beyond the world you think you know, is a place where the wind sleeps, Dot, waiting for you.